My name is Daniel Dunn. I'm the Student Activities Officer here at the Students' Union. I'm with Pro Vice Chancellor Tim Thornton for Teaching and Learning, and he's going to be answering a few student questions today. Please make sure that you do be aware that you can come down and ask questions directly to him at any of our Ask Tim events. The next one's in December. Today we're just going to be going off pre-submitted questions. So Tim, the first question that we've had in is whether we'd be able to put term dates online in a more accessible place for students.
I don't see why not. You mean future term dates?
Yeah, future term dates.
Yeah, I mean the academic calendar is up there on the website. It always has been, not just for this year but for future years. Certainly we could talk about where we put it in a way that meant perhaps there was access through the Student Union site as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, certainly. No, we can certainly look at that one.
Brilliant. Okay, the next one we've had in is what can we do about not having enough cash machines on campus?
Now that's a very interesting question. At the moment, am I right in thinking there's one in the Student Union, there's a couple over in Central Services Building?
Yeah, that's correct.
I will go and talk to the Director of Estates and Facilities and see what he says about availability. Is that something you picked up more generally about a lack of cash machines?
I think we have had quite a few moans and groans about. I think it's more to do with the queue times.
Yeah. Well, I suppose I suffer that as well. I end up queuing by Central Services. Yes, I should look into that one as well.
Fantastic.
I think we should add, shouldn't we, that, as Daniel says, I'm available here in person.
Absolutely.
But also, if students put questions on cards, or if they submit them via Facebook or by Twitter, particularly if they put some means for me to get back to those students, then I will certainly follow them up and explain what we're doing.
Definitely, absolutely. Okay, the first one, I suppose we were kind of expecting to do with timetabling, is the student wants to know why we have so many long gaps within the timetabling.
Yeah. When I was doing Ask Tim sessions last year, timetabling was one of the hot topics. I think one of the first 2-3 Ask Tim sessions we ran, 50% of the questions, and there were a lot of questions, were about timetable. Students were concerned about a lot of things. They were concerned about Wednesday afternoons, lunch times. They were concerned about scattered timetables or very bunched timetables, where I think I had one student come to me and said I think he had 5 hours of classes across the middle of the day. So literally he had no opportunity to get lunch but a 5-minute break between a lecture and a seminar. But we took that very seriously, and as a lot of students will know, we've introduced a new timetabling system this year, which has had some teething issues, there's no question, but certainly we seem to be in a better position now than we were last year. And Danny, obviously Wednesday afternoons are dear to your heart.
Yeah.
When we checked the latest figures as of last week, looking across the whole year, we're pretty sure now there are only a dozen lectures that are taking place across more than 20 weeks, which is basically the full year. Now, if we'd been having this discussion last year, Wednesday afternoons, there'd be huge numbers of Wednesday afternoon lectures taking place. Now, that's no consolation to those people who are still having Wednesday afternoon lectures. We will try and get rid of them entirely next year. Now, the question that was specifically asked here was about
the gaps.
Yeah. We're collecting information on this because the Student Union has already raised this as a concern. So what we're trying to do is to understand how many students have gaps of 4 hours or more in a day, which I think arguably is too long. Somebody coming in at say 9:15 or 10:15 and then not having another class until maybe 3 in the afternoon. What we're trying to do, once we've understood the nature of the problem, is to build the parameters into the timetabling system that allows us to compress and make sure that there's an hour or 2 as a gap, which is reasonable, but not 4 or 5, which is what we've got at the moment. What I hope to do, I shall come back on the 4th of December and give you some hard figures on exactly how many people have got these long gaps in timetables. And also, I have to say, some people have raised concerns about bunching still. They say they've got 3 or 4 hours together and they feel that that's too much. So again, we've asked for some information on how many students are included in these.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair to say when we did our student pulse groups last Tuesday, it was a mixture of things regarding timetables, but I suppose the gaps came up a little bit more frequently in terms of it was more people who were commuting in, and obviously with commuting, and if they're commuting for an hour, it's very costly to them, especially if they're then having to get childcare for that time and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
I think the other thing that we're worried about, and we want to try and do something about, is single timetable events on a day. because, as you described it, if people are travelling a long way or making childcare arrangements, if they're doing that for a single hour in a day, that's obviously less convenient than if they can come in and have 2 or 3 hours groups on the same day. When we look at the National Student Survey, which we take very, very seriously, for 2012, so this is the experience of students last year, there were only 2 measures on which the university did less well than the previous year. One of them was timetable. We knew we had to do something about it. There's been a revolution in the way that with timetables now. We haven't mentioned yet availability of timetables earlier in the year, so incoming students, for the very first time, incoming students had timetables before they arrived. It wouldn't happen in the past. Still, we know there's further to go, so we're working on it together.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, the next one's perhaps a little bit of a question, which is, I suppose, a nice one. And this student wants to know how the new Learning and Leisure Centre will improve student life.
Okay. I've already mentioned the National Student Survey. We also conduct surveys like the Student Barometer, the International Student Barometer. One of the things that those surveys told us 18 months ago, 2 years ago now, was that students felt that some of the social and leisure activities associated with being at university weren't as good as they could be. They weren't bad, but they could be better here at Huddersfield. Again, that is something close to your heart.
Yeah.
We would have to admit, wouldn't we, that looking across campus and more broadly, sport and leisure facilities here aren't the best. But when the university understands that kind of thing, it makes a decision to invest and to improve them. So Learning and Leisure Centre is going to provide significantly enhanced sports facilities. Well, you can probably say more about them than me, because I'm pleased to say that you've been heavily involved in the design process.
Absolutely, yeah. It's been fantastic working with the guys over at the Sports Hall in terms of what's going to go into there and certainly how it will configure in terms of our student groups, which is brilliant because it will obviously double capacity and probably more so than double capacity with the spaces outside of the actual hall itself, but it gives us far more scope to do more and engage more students within sport, whether that just be on a competitive level or on much more importantly in my eyes a participatory level.
Absolutely. Which is something that all of us want to improve. The great thing about it too is that it's at the very heart of campus. So you might see in some universities sport and leisure facilities being developed on the edge or even off campus completely, which is fine, but what you're getting here is that at the very heart of campus, literally the place that everybody walks through every day that they're on campus, there's going to be an integrated learning and leisure facility. As well as all the sport, we're also going to be providing improved facilities for learning, so juxtaposed with the library and the computing facilities that already exist, we'll be improving those facilities. We'll be improving the front of house, so that if you've got a question about anything, about whether how to replace your student card or what welfare advice you can get, what careers advice you can get if you're an international student, what support you might specifically need, all of that will be presented in a much more effective way in the Learning and Leisure Centre. I could go on and on and on. It really is a very, very exciting development for the university, for the students who will be taking advantage of it. And the great thing about it too is that because we're such a successful institution, so financially strong, we can do this without borrowing money. So any of the students who are listening to this and thinking, what's the implications of this for huge increases in fees in the future or whatever, no, we can do this out of the resources we're already generating because we are so successful.
And obviously for students who are here now, they can still see the work that's beginning over there already.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next question is a slightly more serious one. This student would like to know what the procedure is if you're not satisfied with your lecture.
I suppose there are many routes that you can follow. The most straightforward ones are to use the student panel. Now, student panels here, they operate in slightly different ways in different places, but they're all fundamentally based on the idea that the students' opinions really matter. And probably the most immediate way to address something like that would be to go and talk through the student panel about the issues that are arising. We've also got lots of feedback mechanisms, so whether it's module evaluation or the university course evaluation that takes place, we watch very carefully for comments that are made about particular lectures or groups of lectures, about particular aspects of teaching and learning on a course, and we do provide the support and the response that's needed in order to address it. I suspect this is an example where the student hasn't put their name on the card.
No, they have actually.
They have?
Yeah.
In which case, in a very discreet and sensitive way, what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow up with that particular student. I'm going to find out which particular lecturer, which particular course is involved, and we're going to do something about it. Now, I think that's 3 different approaches. So, student panel, module evaluation forms, course evaluation forms, and Ask Tim. Through any of those routes, we should be able to get something resolved.
Absolutely.
If Steve, the VP Education, was here, he would be telling you about a scheme that he and I are both very excited about, which is around students as teaching and learning consultants. Now, I think that's just getting off the ground at the moment, and it's another very exciting way that students can help to improve the quality of the teaching and learning that's going on here. We'll be training and supporting students so they can go into lectures, workshops, seminars, and provide expert comment on ways that the experience in that seminar, that workshop, that lecture can be improved.
Absolutely. I think one thing for me that's key in terms of a subject like this is that it's not just about dialogue between the university and the Students' Union, but it's about that open dialogue between lecturers and students as well, which is really going to kind of create a better teaching environment.
Yeah. I think we all know that in general the standard of teaching and learning here is very, very high. Those students who read the Sunday Times will have seen the Sunday Times league table for teaching excellence, and I'm proud to say, I think the Student Union should be proud to say too, that if you look at the figures for the north of England, this university is number 1 now, number 1 for teaching excellence. As Brian Clough used to say, in terms of teaching excellence, I think I'd rank us somewhere in the top 1.
Brilliant.
I don't think Brian Clough would have said that about the university, but if he'd been here, he would have said it.
Yeah, I'm sure he would have. Okay, so the next one up is something that I'm no doubt we've definitely asked you before, but it's probably just worth refreshing for, I presume it might be a new student or someone who is unaware of this, but it's why don't we have childcare facilities at university?
We did at one time have childcare facilities on campus, but they were remarkably underused. And the work that we did suggested that students wanted to have flexible facilities that were often closer to home or more convenient for a commuting route than to have a location particularly on campus. So the policy for the last few years has been always to provide as much advice and support as we can to point people towards childcare providers in the area. And to ensure that they're able to use those rather than to try to provide a facility here on campus. Now, that said, we did have discussions last year about what I thought was a possibly interesting initiative to look at focused childcare work here on campus, particularly around school holidays, half terms. Here we are in the middle of the Kirklees half term. Whereby I think sometimes very specific childcare needs arise that can't easily be catered for by the standard childcare providers that our students are using. Now, it's not come to anything yet, but certainly I'm very interested in talking to the Student Union about how we might arrange for that. I think we even got some room set aside for it for the half-term week, so there's certainly some possibilities.
Absolutely.
But that in the past there never seems to be sufficient demand for a specific university childcare facility, as opposed to supporting students using childcare facilities outside.
I think again, for us, it's certainly worth adding. We had our union council meeting on Monday this week where we passed a policy on childcare that Nasheed and Dad had put forward, and one of the things within that was about working towards not necessarily a provision on campus, but perhaps better access to provisions within the local community and perhaps better rates, better times, and that's something that she's certainly going to go out and engage over.
We can have a conversation with her about that.
Yeah. But it's definitely worth knowing.
Certainly myself and colleagues in Student Services will be very happy to have that conversation with her about what's done already and how we can improve it.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, so the next one is from a student who wants to know, with the tuition fee now obviously having got bigger, can we not have cheaper textbooks, course-related materials as a consequence?
It's a very difficult question. I would, as everyone involved in the Student Union knows, the university is absolutely opposed to the policy that the government has brought in, which required us to increase fees. We would rather be in a situation where the government, the taxpayer, contributed to the expense of higher education in the way that it used to. When this policy was introduced by the government, we consulted with the Student Union and we were absolutely determined to set the lowest possible fee, what we considered to be a fair fee. the result was that we are the only institution in the top half of the league tables, university league tables, that has a fee of less than £9,000. The university's fee of £7,950 is remarkably good value. Now, what is sometimes hard to appreciate, of course, is that although that fee has increased for students, the amount of money we have per student to spend on their education has actually gone down. It's gone down. Now, I think we can all be quite proud of the fact that we have protected the student experience. One of the things that the Vice-Chancellor said in the midst of this process was that the thing that he would not allow to be diluted in all of this is the experience of the student here at the university, because that's what we're here to serve. But when somebody comes to me and says, well, now the fee has gone up, can we have more of this or cheaper that? I think we do have to recognise that if we reduce the amount of money that's going into the university for higher education, then increasing what we provide in a particular area is inevitably going to mean we reduce it in another area. It's a very difficult question. Specifically on textbooks, what I would say though is that the university has developed a system called My Reading, which I hope a lot of you are already using, which we think is the best in higher education. In fact, we're pretty confident in it. We've recently won an award for My Reading. And what My Reading allows students to do is to click directly through to a huge proportion of the reading materials that they might need for a particular course. Now, it isn't 100% yet. They will still have to access books for some aspects of what they're learning. But in many cases, I know this from my own students' experience, in many cases now, they can click directly through to an e-book, or they can click directly through to a journal article in the way that just wasn't possible in the past. And the result is that we're not having to have students buying books in the volume that they would have done in the past.
Fantastic. It's also probably worth again stating is that there's more and more work being done through the Students' Union and the university to make sure that students are aware of all the costs that are associated with the course as well, which is perhaps not directly answering that question, but it's definitely something that students should know that we're doing.
Absolutely. And I do think we're amongst the best in the HE sector at being totally honest about the charges that we make to students. If you go to some of the universities in this area, you'll find that you're being charged for retakes, for example, which, unless that's advertised very clearly in advance, I think is very, very unfair. This university has made the commitment that it will not charge for retakes. So there's a fee that you pay, and even if unfortunately you have to do a retake, you don't have to pay again in order to get through your year.
Okay, and this is the last pre-submitted question. Please bear with me; it's a little bit illegible.
I'm ready.
Okay, so during this person's time as a student, they found inexperience from lecturers on issues. For example, a lack of priority for discussion, but attention to absolute beliefs. More experienced lecturers, PhD plus, and I don't know what it says. And something to do with course leaders needed because you see inadequately in those that they have no experience or knowledge. Why is this? I think I've read that.
Okay,
right.
Shall I have a shot at answering that?
Yeah, it's very hard to read.
And again, if there was a name on there, I'm quite happy to follow it up and pursue the individual cases. In general, we know that the level of professionalism amongst our staff is very high. We do. We are the first institution to achieve 100% recognition through the Higher Education Academy for our teaching colleagues. Now, most institutions are way back, maybe got 20 or 30% of their colleagues with professional recognition. But if you see your lecturers with the name, with the letters FHEA after their name, that shows that they are fellows of the Higher Education Academy, and it's a clear signal of a baseline level of professionalism that they have attained. Increasing numbers of our colleagues have Masters and PhD qualifications as well. We have a commitment to move towards all of our colleagues having those higher level qualifications. In some cases, what the student in this particular case might have observed, though, is perhaps a lecturer who's come in from industry.
Yeah.
Now, we are very proud of the fact that many of our colleagues have come directly in from industry or the professions. And by their very nature, those people will not yet have PhDs. They will acquire the PhD while they're here. But to say that that person can't come and teach with us, given the fact that they're bringing that immediate experience of the professions of industry, would I think be a bit extreme.
Yeah, absolutely.
When they're here, we will be developing them through PhDs.
Fantastic. Right, okay, that's all for today's Ask Tim event. As I say, you can come and join us on Tuesday the 4th of December for the next one. We hope there'll be more of you down to asking questions directly. Thanks very much for watching.
Thank you. Thank you, Danny.